Yeah, and welcome to you all to our second lecture in the 2024-25 series, Michael Crowley Lecture Series. And it's great as I look out, we have, I think tonight, in excess of 200 people between those of you in the audience and those of you on Zoom. So it's a nice, robust crowd. And we're here to welcome, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later, Dr. Tim Meagher, who was one of our first presenters back in 2002, along with Dr. John Quinn, Dr. Scott Malloy at that time. Quite a contrast because I think he probably had 10 or 15 people at the back bar there. Yeah. Yeah, this is a nice, robust crowd here. And I'm standing in tonight. I'm Mike Slane. I'm standing in for Deanna, our president, who was on another swimming boondoggle, this one in Mexico. And she picked Mexico. Last year was Vietnam. The year before that was Oman. A real zest for activity. But it's gratifying, as I say, to have 200 folks out here. Tim, as I mentioned, Dr. Tim was an early 2002 presenter. And I met him last year when I had the docent. He walked into the interpretive center downtown with his sister Mary. She introduced him to me and we were chatting, and he walked in the back room and he said, "I think I have a couple books here." And he pulled out two books. He held them up, and one was the topic of his first lecture, and it had to do with the Irish in Worcester. And I said, "Worcester?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "That's my hometown." And he said, "Mine also." And it turns out we lived a mile apart. But he went to Catholic schools. I did not. And so I just threw out some names. He said, "I live in Newton Square." And I said, "Well, I live in Tatnick Square." And I said, "Do you know Paul Toomey? Do you know the O'Sullivans? Do you know?" And I got done this list, and he said, "I play ball with all of them at Newton Square." Yeah, that was quite an introduction. He was history professor at Catholic University. He was also the curator of the American Catholic History collection at Catholic U and the university archivist. In 2011 and 12, on a Fulbright fellowship, he taught at the University College in Dublin. Is that correct?
DCU.
DCU.
In 2012.
DCU 2012. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. 2019 at University College Dublin.
Great. I don't know whether you heard that. 2019, the University College of Dublin. And I'd also like tonight to thank Dr. John Quinn for joining in with him, as he did in 2002. He's participated in tonight's presentation as well. And I'll also mention that Dr. Tim won the prestigious Donnelly Award twice for his works in literature. So without further ado, copies of I'll mention that copies of his book will be on sale after the presentation in the back. And next month, I'll talk about next month after he finishes here. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Aboard.
Okay, I guess I want to thank Mike and everyone here at in the Newport Museum, Irish Museum. I want to thank Ann Arnold for all her work, and John Quinn for all the work he's put into this. I appreciate it very much. I want to thank my sister Mary for putting me up, and she does often when I come to your beautiful island. She lives in the smaller one in Jamestown, up here in Rhode Island. And acknowledge my brother Patrick is here, and friends Clement Ho and Michael Guy are also here. And I also want to acknowledge Larry Bartley's contributions here of making this presentation, of supporting this presentation, underwriting it. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do a little intro here. I'm going to talk about the importance of the children of immigrants. We talk about immigrants in Irish American history, and we should, of course, but also the importance of children of immigrants and what effect they have on the development and the evolution of Irish American history, or the evolution of any immigrant group. And then also, I think I want to just mention, think of how groups change in time, just to kind of offhand here, to think about how groups change. Sometimes in the past, we thought in the kind of terms of a simple binary. People were Irish and then they were American. It just didn't work that way. It wasn't that simple. It was more kind of complicated, more interesting too. So I was talk about both those kinds of, will be part of subjects of the lecture. So let me begin. When we think of important moments in Irish American history, that's what we're going to talk about today. Some come readily to mind. Certainly the famine migration to America in the mid-19th century was an important moment. 1.5 million Irish came here in just 10 years, more than all the Irish who had come to America in the nearly 300 years before them, back to the 16th century. William Shannon, in a book called The American Irish, suggested another critical moment in the history of Irish Americans. In his book, The American Irish, it's an old book, published in 1963, but it's a good book. And he made an important point here about the importance of the second generation of the children of immigrants. Shannon pointed to the turn of the 20th century as an important moment in Irish American history, when the American-born children of the famine immigrants would grow to maturity. 3 million of them by 1900, most of them adults by then, far outnumbering their parents. When they came of age at the turn of the 20th century, these American-born children would be very different than their immigrant parents, but they would also be different. They also would be different from American WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. I wasn't sure how to describe these people. Native stock, WASPs, Yankees. I'm going to use Yankee a lot since we're in Rhode Island and then New York and New England. But they would also be different from Yankees, as well as other ethnics in America. Different as individuals in their everyday lives of work, family, and play. Different too in how they as a group understood where they fit in America and who they were, how they defined their identity. These children of the famine immigrants would be critical to the history of Irish America in this turn of the century period. But the maturing of these second generation Irish was not the only important change in America's Irish population at the turn of the 20th century. A huge new wave of Irish immigrants arrived in America between the 1880s and 1920s. 1.7 million Irish came to the United States between the 1880s and the 1920s. I always wondered whether there were a significant number of the people, Irish immigrants who came to Newport were from in that wave in the 1880s and up through the 1920s. Does anybody have ancestors that came in that wave at that time? Yeah, that's what I thought, you know. And probably it was on were the women, was it the women who came or both the men and women? Both? Okay. All right. Because it's the time of the building of all these mansions out here, and certainly in a moment when servants' girls would have could find employment. So that's interesting. The impact of the on the Irish American community of these immigrants who came from the 1880s to the 1920s would not be as great as that of, they would be as great as that of the second generation American Irish. But they did have their own notions of what it meant to be Irish in America. And as we shall see, they would have their say in expressing those notions during this period. So these two trends, the maturation of the second generation and the migration of a new wave of Irish immigrants will be in the important internal causes of change in Irish America at the turn of the 20th century. But there would be causes that came from outside the group, from changes in the group's environment, that would have a powerful effect as well on their everyday life as individuals and how they determined where they fit in America. They would have, of course, included events and trends in America as causes, events like World War I, and also trends in the American economy, and also changing relationships between the Irish and other Americans, their relationships with Yankees, but also other ethnics. The relationships between, not just in the case of the Irish, but in any ethnic group with other ethnic groups is really important to how they begin to think about themselves and define themselves. And so that was true also for Irish Americans. It would also include events and trends overseas, however, rebellion and revolution in Ireland, or changing policies in the Vatican. So let's begin by looking at the everyday lives of the Irish, how they differed from their immigrant parents, as well as the Yankees and other immigrant groups. We could look at many things here: when they married, where they lived, the songs they sang, the games they played. Some people claimed there was an Irish way to play baseball, for example. You'll also think there was a Queen of the Bowery, Maggie Klein, who used to sing songs. She was a vaudeville character. And she sang songs like When Hogan Pays the Rent and, other songs about Irish Americans. Hogan never did pay the rent, as the New York Times noted. But that was a case where they were in vaudeville, an American invention, but they were talking about themselves. They were singing about themselves. They were talking about themselves. But I will talk today only about the work they did, their economic successes and failures. Let's begin with the second generation men. In 1900, and there's a lot of statistics here, but I just want to let you know that I didn't make any of this up, so that I do have data to support this. In 1900, when most second generation men were in their 20s and 30s, about a quarter of them, 24%, were white collar workers. In 1860, when their immigrant fathers had been about the same age, only 7% of them were white collar workers. In 1930, when most second generation men were reaching middle age, about 40% of them were white collar workers. In 1860, when most famine immigrants were that age, only about 11% were white collar workers. Why did the second generation do so much better than the immigrants? One reason was that white collar job opportunities for men were expanding rapidly in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in cities where most Irish Americans lived. Another reason, however, was that increasing numbers of them were staying in school, many now completing high school, and not as many as Yankees completing high school, but over time closing that gap, as well as gaps with other rivals like the American-born English. But they also did better than some others, like second-generation Germans. They were more likely to stay in school and stay longer and graduate than German Americans. Some second-generation Irishmen were not only finishing high school at the turn of the century, they were going on to college. About 1/8 of the second-generation men of college age spent time in college. Catholic colleges for men were growing rapidly at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. Holy Cross had about 200 students in 1902, but had 800 students 8 years later in 1910. There were limits, however, to second-generation Irish men's occupational success at the turn of the 20th century. Most important, they did not seem to fare well in business, owning their own businesses, the kind of classic means of upward mobility in America. Irish American Catholic newspapers complained often about this failure. Why do we not do better in business? We are only halfway up the ladder in business. But the problem was not in owning small shops, but in their inability to establish major manufacturing or merchant firms. It also seemed worse in where we are in the New England, in the Middle Atlantic states, here in New England, the Middle Atlantic states, than in the West. So in Chicago or San Francisco, people did better in creating their own businesses, but not as well here in the East. And the East, New England and the Middle Atlantic states were where 2/3 of Irish Americans lived. So they didn't do well in business, and they knew that, and they were aware of that, and they lamented it. But perhaps this failure, besides this failure, despite this failure, second generation Irishmen also had unique successes that distinguished them from other ethnic groups. A higher proportion of them became lawyers than men in most other groups, for example. In 1930, 1/6 of all American-born lawyers in New England were second generation Irishmen. And that's not a lot of people necessarily, but it's a kind of interesting phenomenon, especially for me, grandfather, father who were lawyers, and two brothers who were lawyers as well. More important, the second generation, and this seems, you know anyway, it's no surprise, the second generation Irish also thrived in politics. No surprise here. Their parents and grandparents had learned the secrets of electoral politics and other secrets of electoral politics in Ireland, in the campaigns of Daniel O'Connell for Catholic emancipation and other causes. But it was the second generation Irish who were really capitalized on that knowledge in America. Between 1870 and 1920, Irish Americans were elected mayors for the first time in 41 American cities in the Northeast and Midwest. By the 1890s, magazines were complaining about the Irish conquest of our cities. 29 of those mayors, 41 mayors, were second generation Irish. 9 were immigrants, and I don't have the birthplaces for the other 3. So we have here Honey Fitz. People may know of him. He's John F. Kennedy's grandfather. He was not the first Irish mayor of Boston. That was a guy named Hugh O'Brien, who was mayor in the 1880s. Honey Fitz was mayor in 1905, I think was his first term. We also have Patrick Boyle and Edward McGuinness. Edward McGuinness was the first Irish mayor, and he was a second generation Irish American. He was the first mayor in Providence, Irish mayor in Providence, graduate of Brown, and also a lawyer. And then in addition, we have the first Irish mayor of Newport, Patrick J. Boyle, mayor kind of off and on between 1895 and 2023. He kind of was defeated, he would get back, he would win the next one, and that kind of thing. He was mayor of Newport more or less between 1895 and 1923.
I offer a correction.
What?
Captain John Morris was the first Irish mayor
Oh.
of Newport.
Oh, really?
Boyle took his place.
Oh.
When he died.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I stand corrected. Oh, he wasn't. Oh, okay. So Patrick Boyle was the first real Irishman. Gonna get in a lot of trouble for that. But thank you though, Father. I appreciate it. By the early 1900s and 1910s, Irish Americans were also moving up into higher offices. They were elected as governors for the first time in 5 states, including Rhode Island. The boy mayor of Pawtucket, Higgins, I think, was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Rhode Island. In 5 states, they were elected for the first time. They were senators. They were elected senators in 4 states in that time period, the 1910s. And in 1912, 43 of them were elected to the United States House of Representatives. Almost all of these governors, senators, and congressmen were second generation Irish. Now, the 43 who were elected in 1912, this was a time when the Republicans split because of the progressive era. They broke into factions. And so Irish Americans did really well in 1912, not just not just in New England or whatever, but also throughout the country. When the Republicans got back together again in 1914, in Connecticut, the Irish, there had been 6 Irishmen, all the congressmen elected were Irish American in 1912. In 1914, when the Republicans got back together again, all of those men lost their seats in the Congress. So second generation Irishmen were more successful than their fathers in finding white collar jobs. But what is most interesting here is their distinctive pattern of success and failure. They fell short in some occupations, business, but succeeded in others like law or politics. They were then different than their fathers, more successful, but different too than the Yankees and the second generation of other groups. They had a different kind of pattern of occupations. But what about their sisters? I think it is fair to say that for all of the men's achievements, second generation Irish women were simply more successful than their brothers. The superiority over their brothers, I think, was what made their work experiences seem so different from other women in America. In 1900, when both Irish men and Irish women were young adults, and a quarter, as I mentioned before, 25% of the men were white collar workers, 30% of the women were. In 1930, when both were approaching middle age and 40% of the men were white collar workers, 60% of the women were. The second generation Irish women, of course, were also way more likely to be white collar workers than their mothers had been. 5 or 6 times more likely to be white collar workers than their mothers had been. In 1860, only 7% of young adult famine immigrant women were white collar workers. And in 1880, only 10% of famine immigrant women, largely middle age, were white collar workers. So there were women were much more successful. Women, for the most part, famine immigrant women were, for the most part, most of them were servant girls. And if not that, then they worked in manufacturing and factories. What was really one of the most striking to me achievements, I should point out, we have a picture of Margaret Haley here, who was a teacher in Chicago and was the founder of the teachers union in Chicago. What was really most striking to me about the achievements of second generation women was the proportion of them who became teachers, about 1/10 between 1900 and 1930. 10% of all the women in the labor force, all the women who were working, were school teachers. It seems like a significant kind of phenomenon. There were a number of reasons why second generation women's success. One was the huge increase in white collar jobs for women in the American economy at the turn of the century, almost exponential growth in the numbers of white collar jobs for women at that point. Jobs like secretaries, saleswomen, bookkeepers, and telephone operators. But it wasn't just greater opportunities that accounted for their success. Their culture helped them as well. Popular plays and songs suggested that second generation Irish women were more ambitious than the American-born Irish men, who seemed to just kind of hang around together in saloons. Women wanted more cultured kind of activity. More practically, second generation Irish women also married later than other women, so they could stay in the labor force longer. So that was another advantage, and especially for teachers, a lot of school committees didn't want married women teaching. They wanted only single women. But most important here again was education. More second generation Irish women went to high school and graduated from high school than American-born Irish men. About half of them graduated from high school, very different from most other groups. And more also went on to college than their brothers or women from other groups. Most to teachers' college, normal schools, they used to be called those days. but some to the new Catholic colleges that were created for women, opening up in this period, like Trinity College in Washington, DC. So in sum, both second-generation Irish men and Irish women were different than their parents, but they differed from Yankees and other ethnic contemporaries as well. The men in the kind of pattern of their kind of jobs, and the women in their kind of success being greater than their brothers. As second-generation Irish men and women were making their way in the world of work at the turn of the century, they, along with both old and new Irish immigrants, were trying to figure out where their people fit as a group in a diverse America. They were also trying to define their identity. Were they Irish? Were they American? Were they both? Were they neither? There would be three phases in this search for their place and identity. The first would be in the 1880s. Most American-born Irish were still kids then, and the new immigrants were just then leaving Ireland for America. So the causes of changes in these 1880s would not come from the new generation or new immigrant rivals within the group, but from outside it in their environment. So for example, in this first phase of the 1880s, they were profoundly influenced by a new nationalist movement erupting in Ireland in 1879. This new movement had two goals: to gain home rule for Ireland, an Irish parliament, and land reform for tenant farmers, giving them greater control over the land they worked. The movement was huge, creating a land league with local branches all across Ireland, but especially in the West. The Land League was founded in Mayo. Irish Americans embraced this new nationalism immediately, and with great enthusiasm, creating over 1,000 Land League branches in the United States, with somewhere between 300,000 to 500,000 members, and raising hundreds of thousands of dollars for the movement in Ireland. But if Irish Americans did much for Ireland, Ireland's nationalist movement did much for them as well, inspiring them to seek change for themselves. With the spread of factories and giant companies in the economy in the 1880s, workers in America in particular were seeking greater control of their work as well. The plight of the tenant farmer in Connemara is the same as the factory worker in Fall River. So they saw this similarity, and they took an inspiration from what happened in Ireland. So we have now, we're talking about the Land League. This is Delia Stewart Parnell, founders of the Ladies Land League. There would be a ladies' league. This is the Ladies Land League in Ireland. There would be a Ladies Land League in America as well, a very powerful Ladies Land League. I don't know if Providence had a Ladies Land League. Worcester certainly had one, very active. And a lot of the school teachers were members of that Ladies Land League.
Rhode Island had one of the first.
Ladies Land League? Oh, okay. Irish American, okay, with this person. So many Irish Americans interested in changing their own situation and taking inspiration from the Irish in the Irish Land League in Ireland, and then joining the Land League, becoming part of the Land League in the United States, would later join a union called the Knights of Labor. Some cases, branches of the Land League would just transform themselves into assemblies for the Knights of Labor, this new union that had been formed. This new union grew from about 50,000 members, when half of them were Irish, to about 700,000 members by 1886, when about a quarter to a third were Irish men or women. While the Knights of Labor rose in 1880s, a very different movement was emerging in the Irish American community: liberal Catholicism. Liberal Catholicism had no great organization enlisting thousands of people, but it had strong support among many bishops, priests, and influential Catholic newspapers, especially in the Midwest. A new Pope, Leo XIII, elected in 1878, was worried about the church's weakening position in a modern world. And so he also cautiously, very cautiously, backed the Catholic liberals for a while. Liberal Catholicism had two related goals. The first was to reconcile differences between Catholics and Protestants in America. And anti-Catholic movements like the Know Nothings of the 1850s seem now to be a distant past. By the 1880s, Irish Americans assumed that those movements were gone away forever, which was not true, as we'll find out shortly. Catholics and Protestants, liberals also pointed out, had fought together in the Civil War to preserve the Union. So they had a history of shared sacrifice from the Civil War. So liberals thought it was time to break out of the Catholic ghetto. Some even talked about doing away with parochial schools at this time. So we have leader of the liberals here, Archbishop John Ireland of St. Paul, Minnesota. He was perhaps the most vocal supporter of the liberals, but he was teamed up with James Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore, who was the leading American bishop at that time. They were both strong liberals. The second goal of the liberals was to Americanize Catholicism. They thought America was the future. If Catholics were to play an important role in that future, it would have to be as members of an American Catholic Church. So they were strongly opposed to parochial schools teaching in German or French or Polish or trying to preserve old world cultures. American kids should be trained in American Catholic schools as Americans. All of these movements would fall apart and disappear by the 1990s. Irish nationalists would suffer from scandals and break into factions. The rickety Knights of Labor would collapse. It was never well organized in the first place, gave way to the more cautious unionism of the American Federation of Labor. Liberal Catholicism would fall after the eruption of yet another powerful nativist and anti-Catholic movement, the American Protective Association, which became very powerful by the 1890s. Liberal Catholicism shortly thereafter would be condemned by Leo XIII. So we move on to a second phase in the Irish search for their place in the 1890s and early 1900. Who and what would replace those movements from the 1880s? Who and what would fill this vacuum? Well, the who were those Irish immigrants who had been pouring into the United States since 1880. They were not faring well in the American economy. They were blue-collar workers, more like the famine immigrants than the white-collar second generation. But many of the new immigrants had extensive experience with the Land League, fighting those battles with their landlords in Ireland. So they brought some special organizational experience to America, as well as a special kind of feistiness as well. The what? The vehicle would be the vehicle for these immigrants, the organizational vehicle for these immigrants in America would be the Ancient Order of Hibernians. The AOH had struggled in the 1870s and early 1880s, troubled by clerical suspicions and factional infighting. But their numbers began to take off in the late 1880s and early 1890s. By 1908, they would boast 140,000 male members and 47,000 women in the ladies' auxiliary. They profited enormously from the waves of those new immigrants coming from an embattled Ireland. So the AOH was very much the new immigrants organization, included others, included some second generation Irish as well, but they were kind of the core and the heart of this new, of the Ancient Order of Hibernians, the revival of the Ancient Order of Hibernians. They profited from those waves of immigrants then. Yet the Hibernians were also helped by the rise of the APA and the ethnic and religious tensions that it provoked in the 1890s. The Hibernians were tough guys, both men and women, and believed, as their president said in the early 1890s, people respect people who stand up for themselves. So they became strong opponents of the APA. They also boycotted and disrupted plays and vaudeville acts that depicted stage Irish stereotypes. You know what stage Irish stereotypes? They kind of, somebody with a battered hat and the kind of bad clothes that had holes in it and spoke some kind of Irish English gibberish, that would be the stereotype of peasants. It had gone back as far as the 17th century, but it was still going strong in the 19th and 20th century. So they boycotted and disrupted these plays and vaudeville acts that depicted stage Irish stereotypes, sometimes throwing garbage at the actors or shouting at them from the aisles. The Hibernians also insisted that Irish Catholics must have the influence and the benefits that their numbers deserved. More jobs in city and state governments, courses in Irish history in schools, both public and parochial, more books on Irish history in public libraries. And they worked constantly to demonstrate Irish Catholic power, reviving St. Patrick's Day parades where they had been abandoned or had fallen on hard times. As recent immigrants, many of the Hibernians were also very aware of the revival of Gaelic culture in Ireland in the 1880s and 1890s. A Gaelic League, which was reviving the Irish language, had been established in 1893. A Gaelic Athletic Association, reviving Irish sports like hurling, had been established in 1884. And the Hibernians and their allies worked to promote the Irish language and Irish sports in America. The AOH gave money to Catholic University, $50,000, where I used to teach, to establish a chair, a professorship in the Irish language. The AOH allies also established their own Gaelic League in America in 1898. Meanwhile, county societies, you know what we're talking about in county societies, everybody was from Tipperary would be part of this society or club, and everybody from Kerry would be part of that kind of society or club. There are very many of them in some of the big cities like New York and Chicago. Meanwhile, Irish county societies such as the Tipperary Society, the Kerry Society, or the Kilkenny Society in New York and elsewhere would create their own hurling teams. They wouldn't have had a hurling team in, say, the late 1880s or early 1890s, but they would create ones. All of them would create ones by the early 1900s. The nationalist movement in Ireland and America, as I said earlier, had fallen apart in the 1890s. So there was no real Irish nationalist movement for the Hibernians and their allies to support now. But they wanted to make clear their opposition to the British Empire. So the Hibernians made a deal with the German-American National Alliance, which served over 2 million members of various smaller German societies. They made a deal to oppose any alliance. They would both oppose any alliance between Great Britain and the United States. There was a lot of talk about the great Anglo-Saxon peoples of America and the United States joining together. This is in 1907. Interestingly, many Hibernians also opposed the United States taking over the Philippines as an American colony, arguing that that seemed too much like something the British Empire would do. As I noted earlier, by 1908, the Hibernians seemed to be riding high. But at the AOH's National Convention that year, the president, Matthew Cummings, warned the members that the AOH could no longer rely on immigrants from Ireland to keep the order alive. Irish immigration to America was now declining. The sons and daughters of the members, the American-born Irish, he argued, the members of the AOH, must take up the work of the AOH if it was going to survive. The American-born Irish were not hostile to Ireland or the Irish, as we shall see, but they were Americans, not Irish. Baseball, not hurling, was their game. So most turned their backs on the AOH at this point. But they would not seek reconciliation with Protestants as the liberal Catholics had done either. The revival of anti-Catholicism in the APA and papal condemnation of liberal Catholicism in 1899 had killed liberal Catholicism and closed the door on outreach to the Protestants for the next half century. No more talk about, the liberals had talked about maybe even closing Catholic schools. There would be no more talk about that, about closing parochial schools. The American-born Irish, however, would not stand alone. As the door closed on reconciling with Protestants, another one was opening. The Catholic population in America grew enormously in the early 20th century. as millions of new Catholic immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe poured into the United States. About 3 million Italians, 2 million Polish immigrants. The Irish had dismissed those immigrants before in the late 19th century as irrelevant, poor, foreign, and there's just too few of them. But their numbers were huge now, and they presented a new opportunity for second-generation Irish Americans. As William Shannon explained 60 years ago, the Irish were the closest to being in while still being out. I think a kind of great phrase, you know. So they became the leaders of the outs. This would be true in politics and unions, but especially in the Catholic Church, where they would create a new people and would become its leaders and models, a people militantly Catholic, but patriotically American. The organization that best embodied this new American Catholicism would be, anybody? Yes, the Knights of Columbus. The Knights argued that Columbus was the first American, the father of all Americans, of all Catholics in America. The Knights were founded in New Haven, Connecticut in 1882, but then their membership grew only slowly for the first 15 years. By 1897, they had 16,000 members. But then their membership took off, surpassing the Hibernians in 1909 with 240,000 members. They were not an Irish American organization. They were an American Catholic one, open to Catholics of all nationalities. But Irish Americans thoroughly dominated the Knights until well into the 20th century. So the Knights and the second generation Irish in general now knew where they fit and who they were. They were the leaders and models of a militantly Catholic and patriotically American Catholicism in the United States. But was there any Irishness in all this? Where was Ireland? On Easter Monday in 1916, as you all know very well, a rebellion erupted in the center of Dublin. But by December it was put down quickly and some of its leaders were executed. But by December of 1918, an Irish nationalist political party, Sinn Féin, heirs to the Easter Monday rebels, had swept the parliamentary elections in Ireland. These Sinn Féin victors would not go to London to take their rightful places in the Parliament of the United Kingdom, as their predecessors had done since 1801, since the end of the Ireland's Parliament in 1801 in the Act of Union. They would meet in Dublin and declare themselves the Parliament of a new independent Ireland. Meanwhile, in America, in April of 1917, about a year after the rebellion in Dublin, the United States entered World War I as an ally of the British Empire. More second-generation Irish would fight in this war than the second-generation members of almost all other ethnic groups, even the English, and more than native stock Americans as well. The American Catholic Church and the Knights of Columbus would strongly support the war effort in World War I. However, when the war ended in November of 1918, many of the second-generation Irish would join with Irish immigrants in America in a great surge of support for an independent Ireland. Membership in Irish American nationalist organizations working for Ireland's freedom would skyrocket, eventually reaching perhaps as many as 800,000 members, including men and women. Well, women were particularly important in this. The Knights of Columbus would now back Irish independence, and many of its members would play crucial roles in the Irish American nationalist movement. For a long time, second-generation Irish had seemed wary of joining the cause of Irish independence. And they were certainly reluctant after the United States entered World War I. They did not want to seem to be unpatriotic, un-American. So why did the second-generation Irish join the nationalist movement now? Two reasons. First, because Catholic Ireland was committed to it, was now fully committed to some form of independence, probably for the first time, and you could possibly say since the Norman invasion in the 13th century, 12th century. Second, because after the war ended, Ireland's cause could become an American cause. With the end of the war, loyalty to the United States was no longer an issue. They were loyal to the United States, but they could be loyal to the United States and to Ireland. Woodrow Wilson himself had endorsed self-determination for all nations in 1916 as an American war aim, though he was thinking of the Polish and Poland at the time. So second generation Irish and Irish immigrants in America thought, Poland, what about us? What about Ireland? So they became in the nationalist movement because the environment had changed. We talked before that the environment is one of those kind of causes that makes a difference in how people change, how the groups change. So they became involved in the nationalist movement because the environment had changed. It was possible for them. And so they had changed as well. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Tim. This is really amazing. And I should point out the book's published by Yale University Press. I first learned about the book when I was reading the Wall Street Journal. There was a big book review for it, really a real rave review. So this is really an important book. So thank you for sharing this with us. I thought I'd go back to that one slide we missed because that was about the map.
Oh, okay.
And can we go back to Tim can explain that map for a second?
Well, this is in the book. And it's a map from Worcester, Massachusetts. You may, people recognize these streets, Bellevue Street, King Street, et cetera, those kinds of things. Anyway, it's near West City Hall Hospital for those 3 or 4 of you who know Worcester geography. And it was made by a priest at Catholic University who was a scholar in the Irish language. He was a very distinguished scholar in the Irish language. But he grew up in Worcester. I think his aunt was a major player in the Ladies Land League in Worcester. And he became a major player in the 1920s and 19-teens and 1920s of support for the Irish Rebellion and the Irish Revolution from America. But anyway, he drew this map, and I used it in my classes because it's probably hard to see here, but it identifies where people lived, including a couple of Mahars, although M-A-H-E-R. They're, I think, somewhere over here. I can't see exactly. Right up here. Mahars, but also all these other Irish names. And then it says, in other places, other people, I would say, Protestants, like over here. So they didn't get named. Now, one of the reasons I use this is that we talk about Irish neighborhoods, that these were neighborhoods, and we have this sense that they were all the people in them were Irish. But sometimes that wasn't the case. There were a lot of other people there, but they understood who was, they understood them as Irish. These were their people, and so that's what they remembered as, and he remembered in the 1920s. He had lived there in the 1890s. Actually, where he lived next to a Swedish and a French Canadians and stuff who never appear on this map now, just as Irish. Oh, sorry. So I think it's a good example of how that would work. That it didn't have to be an entirely Irish neighborhood to be, in their minds, an Irish neighborhood. And there's a historian named James Barrett who's talked about this, and how usually there would also be a Catholic church that would be the center of their kind of neighborhood. And they understood, and they would even name the neighborhood after the Catholic Church or something like that. But that was the way they kind of organized. It was the center of the neighborhood. Okay.
Okay. I just have a question or two for you, and then I will open it up to everybody else.
Okay.
Oftentimes in textbooks, when you talk about the late 19th century Irish, they use the term lace curtain Irish.
Yeah.
And there's that whole image that those were the folks who had the money to put the lace curtains, and you had these big families, and the oldest son got the property and everybody else had to scatter. But the image was always that they were sort of middle class, but you don't use that term anywhere, I don't think. And I don't think you don't seem to you don't make them seem like they were middle class, these folks coming in the 1880s.
I think that, no, not the people who came in the 1880s, but the second generation people included people, the lawyers, doctors, and the term lace curtain was invented in the 1890s. And to refer to people who were better off, middle class. The other phrase that was used sometimes was fruit in the house when nobody's sick. They had finances.
Huh.
So, you know, this was a kind of definition of being middle class. And so they did use it, I think.
Okay.
And it's coined at this particular moment in the 1890s, at that turn of the century era.
Okay. Okay, I got one more question, and then we'll open it up. What about the importance of place for the Irish who settle in America? Do you think you had a different experience if you were out west versus if you were in Boston or Worcester? Or are there multiple experiences based on region, I guess?
Yeah, I know there are, definitely. I mean, San Francisco, the Irish were elite in San Francisco. The Irish were old money in San Francisco by the 1890s, because they came in the famine immigrant at times and immediately began to make a lot of money. Had a huge bank of their own, Hibernian Bank, and so they were much more successful. You know, than people further east. New England was kind of, for a long time, well, it was the worst in some ways in terms of that, of certainly in being able to move into the elite. That was very difficult. All the clubs that would not allow you to be a member, et cetera, those kinds of things. But there was a big difference. Chicago was a pretty good place to be too. Irish Americans did relatively well in Chicago as well. So it's further west, but it's more difficult in the east, and probably most difficult in New England, I think, for a long time. It gets better. I mean, they get better as time goes on and get into the 1930s. They're kind of edging up in terms of their occupations, in terms of their occupations by that time.
Let's open it up to the audience.
We're going to use this microphone so that your questions can be heard by everyone at home and for the recording.
So
if
you need to go.
use this microphone, answer the questions.
I had a question about the lace curtain Irish tube. The first place I ever heard the term was from Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy on a documentary, described her family as lace curtain Irish.
Yeah. Well, she would certainly qualify. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, her family though, her father was he was Honey Fitz, the mayor of Boston, so he was pretty successful. He's lace curtain. They would, you know, be successful kind of people, you know. So there's probably that would still be for the Irish in New England. You know, that would be. Lace curtain was about as high as you could go, kind of middle class and just above the middle class, perhaps, you know, doctor, lawyer. As I said, lots of lawyers, lots of doctors, not people who were necessarily founding new businesses, new companies and things like that. Other immigrants, as I said, did that, but the Irish were very slow to do that and recognized that. They complained about that. Anybody else? Well,
Hi, this is generalized question, but I always thought back when the original people had to leave because of the famine, somebody paid passage for them to go on these ships. Who raided, and where'd the money come from them to come across?
yeah, the money came, you mean the money for ticket?
The farmers and the families that needed to get out of Ireland, how did they get money for this passage?
A lot of it came from overseas. You know, if there were people already there, there was a lot of chain migration, a lot of people were going to the same kind of cities or towns or neighborhoods, families who were in the United States and sending money back. Just huge amounts of money were being sent in the mails back to people in Ireland. For other people, you know, it was more difficult if they didn't have somebody who would be willing to pitch in for the money they needed. Some landlords paid for their people to get off the land, get them off the land, and they sent them to the United States, and they paid their way. But a lot of it was this kind of chain migration, and a lot of it was the people who would come. Some families would send out somebody early, a male, to become a worker, maybe a female as well, but to become a worker, make some money, and then begin to send money back.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Oh, I had heard that we were sending a lot of lumber over to Europe.
Yeah.
All right. And so the ships coming back to get the lumber, they didn't have that many, they didn't have that much. So the fare was something like, fare was very low for the Irish. For anyone, actually.
Well, it became a big business, a huge business by the famine. It was actually becoming a big business before then. The lumber trade was lumber from Canada coming to the UK, so there was there are boats going back and forth from the UK to Canada. In the period before the famine, and even during the famine, there were ships that were going to Canada, and the Irish would get off in Canada and then come south and walk, or sometimes walk all the way south into New England, or come to the United States. So there was the fares to Canada were cheaper because the English wanted those guys to go to Canada. They wanted to people Canada, so they made the fares cheaper to Canada. I know.
I apologize if you already answered this, but what happened over in Ireland in like the 1880s that caused this migration?
Well, there was a really terrible catastrophe, almost another famine in the 1870s, late 1870s. That was really difficult, and that began to push people to go. That famine ended, but a lot of people thought this is going to be like 1847 all over again. But then it also became the problem was that Irish agriculture couldn't compete in a lot of ways with other places, and that competition was becoming more and more difficult by the 1880s. And so they had to, those people had to migrate. Most of the immigrants who were coming in the 1880s were coming from Connaught, from the west of Ireland, or the western parts from western parts of Kerry, or the western parts of Cork and places like that. So those were people who the economy was becoming too difficult for them. And then those were the people who were coming. Yep.
Right, the English government was assisting the immigration as well. You said that the immigration, agriculture in Ireland was being depressed because of the moving over to pasturage rather than to agriculture.
Right.
So the English government was doing that, causing the Irish to resent their having to move.
Yeah, I mean, right.
With the lumber trade was originally from Maine.
Yeah.
That's the original source of lumber trade. But when we revolted against the British, they moved it to Canada.
Yeah.
One thing we know about the Irish is they didn't necessarily get on with each other. And we really didn't.
I beg your pardon?
They really didn't. And you don't really talk about that.
Oh.
But if you were in Rhode Island in the 1870s, you would belong to the Ancient Order of Hibernians, and they prided themselves on bringing the Irish together. Having the early years, they fought against each other in the railroad gangs and the other groups. And they were opposed by the Clan of Gad. And both had different ideas of what should transfer. The Ancient Order of Hibernians didn't want anything to do with violence. The Clan of Gad, who are the descendants of the Fenians,
right,
they were in favor of violent revolt
Right,
and the two groups separated each other.
right.
The ancient Hibernians had their Hibernian Day at Rocky Point. The Clanagel had their Irish Day at Rocky Point. And the difference between the two assemblies was the Hibernians played Irish games and Irish sports. While the Clanagel, they had political speakers come in and tell them how terrible the English were.
Right,
And the challenge, I think, is when you get into the 1880s, when you get the second generation coming into politics, they divided. By the 1880s, many of the Irish in Rhode Island were voting for Cleveland, and others were voting for Blaine. The two groups had separated again. The best chance for unity was the Land League. And you might recall why. Everybody, all the farmers in Ireland were in favor of owning their own land.
right.
All right. However, they also moved on to parliamentary rule, and the Northern Irish didn't want that.
No, well, that's
So
what,
they were split,
right.
and it was split here too,
What, the Hibernians?
by Hibernians and the Clanagel.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of Hibernians probably were sympathetic to the kind of physical force nationalism that the Klan
Well, one
developed.
thing I'd like to know, and so at some point in the 1880s, the Ancient Order of Hibernians allowed their various groups to form the Hibernian Rifles.
Uh-huh,
They begin to take a militant stance towards what's happening in Ireland. Well, the Clanagel, there's the Irish Volunteers. And if I were going to show an Irish parade in the 1890s, what I would show is military companies.
oh, yeah, they had a lot of,
They were the core of, so the Irish are taking a militant stand.
right,
All right, well, they formed the Hibernian Rifles in order to have a military guard for their assemblies.
uh-huh.
All right, was there more than that?
Well, I think the Hibernians, I'm not sure about the, the military companies and, what their role was, et cetera. But the Hibernians, I think were also committed to an independent Ireland, which is not what Parnell was committed to
A
necessarily.
peaceful one.
Yes,
The
well,
church was favored the Ancient Order of Hibernians rather than the nationalist groups,
right.
because they favored nonviolence.
Right. Well, that was the problem why they didn't grow so much in the 1870s and 1880s, because they were accused of being a violent organization connected to the Molly Maguires in the Pennsylvania coalfields.
Yes. However, that passed.
Right.
And the Ancient Order of Hibernians were proud that they were not a violent organization. They made that very clear.
Right.
But the Clanagel,
Oh, no, the Clanagel was definitely a violent organization.
All
The
right.
bombings.
they almost got together over the Land League. Because here in Rhode Island, even the Northern Irish, the Protestant Irish, got together and joined together in promoting the Land League.
Yeah.
It's unique. But after that, they split again.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Any other?
Maybe there's time for one more. I know Mike has an announcement to make.
I'll make it quick. Any idea how many Irish immigrants cross border Canada into the US?
I don't have it off the top of my head. It would be about half of the immigrants who went actually before the famine would have crossed from Canada into the United States. So, but I don't know what the number might be. I mean, it's about 400, maybe about 200, 250,000, but that's a guess.
So they would have blended right into society, Irish society in New England at that point.
Well, some of them
Not
just
really
got,
registered.
some of them just got off the boat
Right.
and just went two-boat Irish. You know, they would get on another boat coming south into the United States, or some of them walked. You know, down through Maine and Vermont into the United States. So there was they were intending to go to the United States. They only took the boat from Ireland to Canada because it was cheap. The British had made it cheaper for them to go to Canada because they wanted to build up the Canadian population. So there's, you know, there are women who wanted to go to the United States. They knew they could get jobs in service, but they weren't going to get jobs in service in Canada. They could get them in the United States. America was still the magnet, you know. I mean, they went there as a means of getting to the United States. Anybody else? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.
And I'd like to, let's not wait another 22 years before we get you back here.
Probably have to do it soon.
And thanks for it really put a bow on our many discussions here about the transformation of Newport from a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Republican maritime enclave into an Irish Catholic Democratic enclave by the turn of the century. So it really tied that together as well. And thank you. And I'm going to look in the rearview mirror for 1 minute for a couple of weeks ago to thank Kathy Papp and her fundraising committee for the work that they did in bringing Father Mark Soriel's interpretation of the Irish contribution to Newport. For those of you that were lucky enough to be there, it was really quite a night. Very entertaining. And looking forward now, next month we have back Cormac O'Malley. I don't know whether you remember him from a couple of years ago. Fascinating gent whose dad, Ernie O'Malley, was a member of the 1916 posse and the Civil War crowd, and was the only one ever to escape from Kilmainham jail and did it twice. So he's got fascinating gent. He's from Stonington, Connecticut, and he'll have another great discussion with us. So I thank you all for being here. I thank Dan Titus and May for the technical assistance here in bringing this together. And again, Dr. John, Dr. Tim, thank you very much.